Hello there, I'm Janet Hogan, founder and creator of The Fifth Door, and welcome to this special mini webinar, How to Stop Self-Sabotage Without Spending Years in Therapy. And I'd just like to say it's great to see you here. I'm so glad that you've joined me here in the Zoom room. And over the next few minutes, I'm just going to help you understand a little bit more about what makes you tick. So first, however, I'd just like to ask you a question. To what degree are you feeling the effects of all the uncertainty that's going on out there at the moment? So let's just go through a bit of a checklist. And you might want to just write down any of these symptoms, if you like, that you might be experiencing right now. And I just want to reassure you, if you are experiencing any of these, it's absolutely normal, right? As isolating and disconnecting as it can feel. So number one, probably the most obvious one, is stress. I think this probably is affecting most people at the moment, so sometimes you feel it in your body, a tightening across the chest, maybe in your stomach, that pit in your stomach. So yeah, just write that down if you're feeling stress. The next one I'm seeing a lot of is anxiety, triggered by uncertainty about the future. And it almost feels like the actual pandemic is anxiety rather than, the virus that we're all talking about. And sometimes, if it's really prolonged, that anxiety or that inner angst can actually develop into full-blown depression. That feeling where you just really don't want to get out of bed. You don't see any point in taking any action whatsoever. Of course, insomnia can be a real dog as well. Waking up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock, going, oh my God, I've got to get to sleep, and then worrying about it so much. Sleep is the very thing you can't achieve, and so it becomes a chronic condition. That in turn can lead to all sorts of, more wide-ranging problems, even post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm hearing from a lot of people who just have trouble sleeping right now. And accordingly, sometimes we try to self-medicate through some kind of addiction. People drinking after work who normally never used to do that. We're seeing changes in behaviors. Of course, addiction to work to kind of drown out the noise that's going on outside. Relationship breakdowns. I was talking to a woman the other day, and she was saying that she runs a restaurant, and of course it's struggling right now during a period of lockdown, and her husband was actually blaming her for the financial situation they're in, so their marriage is under stress. And then we can also experience symptoms of chronic disease, high blood pressure, pains in our body, chronic fatigue syndrome. All of these things tend to capture our attention, and we tend to put all of our focus on the symptom. But what if there was, a more underlying cause? And that's what we're going to explore today. So why am I so familiar with all these various ailments? Because I've experienced them firsthand myself. I was an entrepreneur on steroids. I would follow the mantra of, the harder I work, the more money I make, the happier I'll be. And sure enough, I achieved a lot, managing 2 restaurants, an advertising agency in Sydney, real estate, buying, renovating, selling 117 properties, doing a $23 million land development. My partner and I actually created a suburb. And as if we needed to do more, we also started up a destination wedding business between Australia and Bali. So I actually did get to the point where I had everything I thought I wanted. The fabulous waterfront mansion pictured there in Australia's Whitsundays that we built from scratch, a beautiful family, 3 gorgeous girls, solid marriage, money in the bank, can it get any better than that? Private beach next door, we had it all. But I'll never forget the day I was sitting in a kayak, just surveying everything that we owned. And instead of that promised happiness, all I felt was emptiness. And I thought, what the hell's going on? Clearly, I've spent the last 30 years climbing this mountain only to reach the top and realize it was the wrong one. But because I didn't take action, the universe took it for me. And in 2008, delivered the global financial crisis. So over the space of the next 12 months, I would watch as virtually everything that we'd worked so hard for just disappear. And because my sense of self-worth was tied up in our net worth, it was almost as if I was watching myself disappear. And, you know, it got to the point where I remember hearing on the news about this German industrialist who dealt with his loss by throwing himself in front of a train. And instead of feeling empathy or compassion, I was obsessed by one thought, which was, if only that was me. Now, I don't know if you've ever been at that ground zero point, but what I believe is that death is inevitable. It's actually, what type of death do you choose? You know, do you choose physical death, where you pass all your suffering onto those you leave behind for them to deal with, or metaphysical death, where you have to let go of a long-held belief and actually change your whole world view? And so that threw open for me this question of, you know, if money doesn't buy happiness, then what the hell does? And so I went in search of answers to what I regard as life's three most urgent questions. Who am I? What do I really want? And why am I here? And I would go to countless workshops and seminars all around the world trying to find the answers, and I didn't find them, but I got to the realization that somewhere along the line, I had been turning up in a way that wasn't authentic at all, in being what I thought was selfless as this tireless worker. I was actually being selfish and denying the world my gift. And so what happened was I created the program that was effectively the rope ladder that I wish someone had thrown me when I needed it most. And it was called, it's called The Fifth Door, and that's how it started. And essentially the essence of The Fifth Door was all about helping people understand their true life path, because clearly mine had been a zigzag path to nowhere. Ultimately, that's what it felt like. So I became very focused on helping people get, you know, what I call the magic trifecta, which is a sharp understanding of what it is that you really love to do, what it is that you're also good at, and what can also solve a problem for others. Because if it doesn't, let's face it, you're not going to actually get paid for it. In fact, if it's just something that you love to do and something that you're good at, essentially it's just a hobby, right? You know, it's like my mother-in-law would crochet teapot covers, and we don't want to be stuck in that space. And equally, if it's something that we love, and it might be, you know, something that people pay good money for. I'm thinking maybe, you know, like being a tennis champion or something, but you suck at tennis, then effectively it's a dream. And finally, and I guess this is a space where most people find themselves, if you're good at something, like you've got the skills and accordingly you're being rewarded for it, like you know, you're making a salary or whatever, but your heart's not in it, well, that's effectively just a job. So clearly we want to have all three pieces in place. And when we do that, we arrive at what I call your sweet spot. So this is where I was getting people to this point where they had this absolute clarity. And then lo and behold, I ran into this incredible problem. You know, I would get them to this point, and then the problem, which I can sum up in one word, and you might be familiar with it, was inaction. I could not get them to cross the threshold from knowing what they had to do to actually doing it. And I came to this point where I thought, well, why am I even bothering to teach this program if it's actually not delivering a tangible outcome? And so my quest, if you like, then became about, how do I solve this problem of inaction? And you know what that feels like, I'm sure. You know, that feeling of being stuck, like you've got one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake, and you kind of smell the burning rubber on the road. That's the smell of inaction. How do we solve that? And so as I dug further into this, I realized that all of us are stuck in what I call a crazy loop. And I'll share my story, how it played out in my life, so that you can perhaps start to apply it to your life. So it's typically something happens to us between the ages of 0 and 7, which I call a crime. And it feels like, you know, to the young soul, it feels like it's a crime that's been perpetrated against us. So there I was at the age of 4, and a very loved only child. I'm sure I was quite precocious. And I'm watching as my parents bring this bundle from what I think is the baby shop. It turns out it's my little sister, home one afternoon. And in that split second, I notice as all the eyes of the room go from me and telling me how wonderful I am to what seems like this shapeless little bundle. And to make it worse, my sister also was suffering from chronic colic. So she would scream her lungs out all day, all night, to the point where it drove my mum crazy, and she had to turn the lawnmower on to drown out the noise. So, big problem in my view, which could be solved. We were going shopping 6 weeks later in a department store, and as I was walking past all these appliances, I noticed they had price tags on them, little stickers. So I carefully peeled all the stickers off and pasted them on my sister's forehead in the hope that someone would buy her. Well, when we got home, my mum just let loose. She screamed at me, and louder than this, right? You naughty, naughty girl. And I don't know if you recall, in the day, the wooden spoon was the tool of punishment at the time. She smacked me on the backside with the wooden spoon, sent me to my room where I felt terribly alone, but more importantly, where I was engulfed by a sense of something that I hadn't experienced before. Let's call it a negative emotion. I now know, looking back, that it was in the realm of shame and guilt and humiliation and all of that. I didn't know at the time. In fact, we don't know what these emotions are at the time. We can't process them. And accordingly, what happens instead is we create a story around them. And this was the breakthrough moment for me, when I realized that this belief that we create, that we wrap around the emotion, we do as a way of self-protection. Because if we have a belief that we feel is true, that agrees with, say our parents or the outside world, our caregivers, then it's more likely that we'll have a sense of fitting in. So in my case, my mum, it came directly from her, she was yelling at me, you're a naughty, naughty girl. So it just became simply, I'm a naughty girl, right? And that was kind of hardwired into me. And so that's what we call our core destructive belief. It goes way beyond I'm not good enough. Everyone I've worked with, and I've worked with hundreds of people, I have to say there is just as many core destructive beliefs. It seems like a thumbprint. We have our own individual one. And it's the words that come after I'm not good enough that really count. I'm not good enough because why? Because I'm a naughty girl, right? So that's really, if you want to solve the problem of what's keeping you stuck, this is where you have to go. You have to crack this. What is your core destructive belief? Why is it so important? Because it in turn triggers your core fear. So my core fear was the fear of getting into trouble. Makes sense? And so I would do everything to not get in trouble. And this is when we then veer towards the opposite of our core destructive belief, which I call the overcompensating positive belief, that puts us in the prison of the overcompensating self. So I'm going from I'm being naughty girl to the overcompensating I'm the nice girl. Whereas I do everything to make sure I don't get into trouble. I work very hard at school, try and get 100% in all the tests, even put my hand up to be the milk monitor. And instead of the prison of my bedroom, it becomes the prison of being Miss Goody Two-Shoes. With this pattern in place, the next stage is kind of inevitable, because that negative emotion, just like the core destructive belief and the overcompensating positive belief, become hardwired into us. And so it's inevitable that we're going to be drawn back to experiencing that shame and guilt again, as unpleasant as it is. It's like a case of better the devil you know. And so what happens in our adult life, instead of being the victim of a crime perpetrated on us, we become the perpetrators of the crime. So to share with you the most dramatic example, in my case, there I am at the age of 21. I've been in a relationship for 2 years with my husband. We've now been together 40 years, and I have a one-night stand. And I have no idea of the core destructive belief playing out beneath my surface. All I know is that the next day I look at myself in the mirror and I am engulfed in a sense of shame. And, the person I see, I don't even recognize. And the problem here is I don't know what's driving me, but understanding that, I'm still in love with my husband, even though we, or my partner, we weren't married at that point, and that we broke up, we decided to remarry. But this whole event, we just swept under the rug of our marriage. And so accordingly, this crazy loop played out, so that coming from this fear of, you know, not being the nice girl, of getting into trouble, I basically changed the prison of my bedroom as a little girl to my desk. And I hid myself behind a desk for 30 years, you know, running these businesses, thinking I was being, you know, the dutiful wife, mother, and career woman. So when I realized how this plays out, I thought, well, clearly, what we have to do is we have to understand, you know, what was that event in our childhood? And a lot of people can't remember, but we have ways of taking you there to unearth what that was. You know, what was the event that kind of created the shock that set the whole thing going, the ball rolling? And what emotion did that then create? So we've got those pieces in place. And we know, if we fast forward to now, to the present time, that it's that, if you like, that unhealed childhood wound that is creating all the problems in our current life, in our adult life, you know, whatever they are for you. So think about this. Here's a, you know, list of typical ones: financial loss, bankruptcy, divorce, illness, stress, anxiety. And we know enough to know that all of these things, you know, that are playing out in your life possibly have been caused by making bad decisions, right? A bad decision is a decision based on what? What's the four-letter F word? You got it? Fear. Okay. So we kind of know that this is the dynamic playing beneath the surface of us. What I realized was that the connective piece is what's causing all the trouble, and the connective piece is your core destructive belief. So if we can solve this, if we can ask ourselves, what's my core destructive belief? This is the game changer. Why is it so important? Well, because it has just this enormous ripple effect. So imagine that red dot there is an event or a shock that happened to you as a small child. It can be a tiny event, doesn't have to be life-changing. You might not even remember it. But what you can presume is that it's caused some kind of negative response, a negative emotion or a dark emotion like shame or guilt, which in turn for you has created your core destructive belief. And I'll just say, you cannot work out what your core destructive belief is on your own. You just can't. And people who I've taken through the process say as much. You know, they say, wow, there's no way I would have ever uncovered this myself. And that's why it is such a problem, because people cannot simply know what it is. It's very deep, deep, deep. But that in turn creates this fear. And of course, and this is another thing to discover about yourself, you know, what is your core fear? And of course, then that leads to this overcompensating behavior. So if you like, think of it this way, we're swinging, and just see if this feels real to you. We're swinging between a core destructive belief, let's call that A, and then C is the overcompensating self. Do you get that feeling? It's like an internal tug of war, where there's an aspect of you that you're running away from, but then where you're running to is so extreme that neither side is sustainable. Each of those positions, A and C, require a lot of energy, and this is why I call it the pain pendulum, because we're running away from the pain of our past and that unresolved childhood wound towards something that makes us feel good about ourselves. This is where we see savior syndrome. You know, people want to save the world. We want to believe that we are a good person, and so we overcompensate. But it's exhausting at the end of the day. So finally, where we want to go with this is B. So what's B all about? Well, B is what I call your core truth. And this, just like something hanging from gravity, requires no effort. You're just hanging in your core truth. It's effortless. It's where we all belong. So finding your core truth is then possible. How this works is we have a core destructive belief, so that's a given. And then our job, once we have brought that to the surface, once we become conscious of it, it starts to disengage. It starts to lose its hold over us. And from that position, we can start to see and accept our core truth. So we're going from a state of pain to passion, essentially. When we have our core truth clear to us, this is when we can start to charge ahead with our life, because the core destructive belief is what is creating the inertia in your life. If you're feeling stuck or like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, you can kind of feel it in your whole system. It's like a negative cloud of energy within your body. This is what it's literally like carrying a 20-kilo bag of cement within you. When we can get to the core truth, it actually creates action. And this is why it's so important that we get you there. If this is how you're feeling, if you're feeling stuck. In fact, the aim really here is to do what you love. To do what you love. And when you do what you love, it creates a whole new ripple effect, which is a positive one, not a negative one. So it creates a positive emotion. So as I'm talking to you right now, I'm feeling the energy of positivism, of gratitude that you've chosen to watch this video. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel good that I might be able to help you get unstuck. That fills me with a sense of fulfillment. And that sense of fulfillment, in turn, reinforces the core truth. So my core truth is I'm a circuit breaker. So I've taken that aspect of naughtiness, if you like, and the overly good girl and brought them together to break a circuit. So that's taking the naughty part of me, but applying it for the good of others. So can you see how that works? The core truth borrows from both sides and brings us to a place of no effort. So that in turn changes our attitude. So my attitude is always about, where can I go further with this? It's not retreat. It's always going further out. And then that leads to purposeful action. So just imagine that in your life, if instead of waking up in the morning, you're going, oh, do I really have to get out of bed? It's almost like there's something pulling you out of bed. That's what it's like. So instead of having to push, you're being pulled out. And what's really interesting is when you can get to this level of actually applying what you do to something that's bigger than you, you are being pulled. I believe you're being pulled by what I call universal energy. It's when all the forces start to combine. You've heard of the law of attraction, and everything is actually pulling us to a direction. Life at that point becomes, I'm not saying it's not without challenges, but it becomes much, much easier, because we're no longer working against ourselves. You no longer have that inner saboteur at work. So you might be wondering, well, how long does all of this take? Is it hard? Well, look, my background in advertising gave me one great gift, and that was the gift of respect for people's time and knowing that essentially no one's interested in what I have to say, and that I have to deliver something very quickly. So appreciating that a message had to be conveyed in 30 seconds, or sometimes in the case of a billboard in 3 seconds. So this major shift will not take you months or years. And I don't think we've got months or years to waste. And I certainly have done therapy myself and hated the fact that it was so drawn out and interminable, and that there never seemed to be, a set outcome. So my whole way of operating is to deliver change fast. So you can achieve permanent change in days, or if you're working one-on-one with me, in hours. It's quite extraordinary. And I know part of you might be going, oh yeah, but how long does it last? Is it like one of those big rah-rah workshops you go to where you feel good for 3 days and then the dopamine drops and it's gone? No, I have plenty of testimonials to show that this is deep-rooted permanent change. As they say, awake is awake. When you're in something, you cannot see it, but when you can see it, you're no longer in it. That core destructive belief, remember the pain pendulum, and the overcompensating positive belief no longer have their grip on you. You are now in charge. So why is this so important? Well, let's look at where we're at right now. Okay, let's say that little black square is the present reality, and we know that at some point in the future, everything that's going on regarding this pandemic will be over and life will revert to some kind of normalcy. But we don't know when that is. So accordingly, most of us are focused on what we call the survival line, which is pretty much synonymous with when there'll be some kind of global vaccine available to everyone, and we feel it's safe to mingle or whatever. So a lot of people are actually just playing a waiting game, and they might think that they're just, moseying along, but if they're in a state of not taking action, most likely they're in a position of freeze. They're coming from fear, and they're actually frozen to the point where they can't take action. The problem with that is that the inevitable path, if you like, isn't straight. We're actually drifting down at that point. Our position is worsening every day. Or think about it, maybe if you're not on the red line, maybe you feel that you are taking action, but is it the right action? Is it strategic? Or are you just staying busy? Are you just, watching the news, checking WhatsApp groups, doing what you think you need to do to get through each day? Now, if that's you, chances are you might actually be in flight mode, which is a kind of a state of denial. And in flight mode, you're taking lots and lots of little actions. So it's not freeze, you're doing something, but it's just almost like treading water. So that once you actually get to where the world feels like it's operating on a more normal level, the uncertainty started to disappear. You just find yourself where you are now. You haven't actually gained any ground. So clearly, fortunately, there's a third option, and this is really the one that we want to be aiming for, what we call the green line. And the green line is where you're not in a state of freeze or flight, but fight. And what I mean by that is taking affirmative, assertive action, okay? Thinking strategically, taking control of your life. And when you're not ruled by fear, this is what you're able to do. You're actually able to move ahead. Now, why is it so important? Because when all this whole pandemic thing started, we were all pretty much in the same place. Remember how unifying it felt? Wow, this is for the first time a problem that the whole world is experiencing together as one. But notice how that's changed. Notice how since the second wave, we're feeling a little bit more uncomfortable, more isolated, more disconnected. And so imagine if you just stay on either the red or the orange line until we get to this survival line, what's that going to look like? And if you're on the red line, actually, it's going to be almost impossible from your position to get even up to the orange line, let alone the green line. And if you're on the orange line, you're closer to the green line, but you won't be ready for the opportunities, because once the vaccination or whatever it is that's a big game changer happens, we're going to see huge opportunities, massive opportunities at that point. But if you're in freeze or flight mode, you're not going to be ready for it. And so time here is the enemy as much as anything. The more you wait to take action, so the more you let inaction be your master, the harder it's going to be to catch up. So the question is, inaction now is actually something that you can choose. You can choose between inaction or action. Through this process, I can step you from being in that state of freeze essentially to freedom. So you have to look inaction in the face and go, all right, now that I see it as something as clear as day, and I can recognize it in myself, and it's this feeling of, it might feel like there's obviously fear behind it. It might feel like self-doubt or imposter syndrome, or however you experience it. It's almost like I've got this great idea, but there's part of me that thinks I can't achieve and I'm not able. There is a way around this. So now you actually do have a clear choice between inaction and this, which is what I call freedom, living the life that you love, where you are doing what your heart desires. You're experiencing joy. It's something that you're good at. And most importantly, it's something that's making a contribution. We're talking about a mission-oriented life here. So if you feel that there's a little flame inside of you that's potentially a raging bonfire, if you feel that part of you has been buried alive, as I did for all those years, if you feel that you're hiding or that you're living your life at half-mast, well then consider that maybe the time has come for you to do something about it, to enter your greatness. Because I know every single person I've worked with, and they run into the hundreds, have all discovered that there's more to them than they ever thought. And just as I know, just the fact that you've listened to this all the way to the end, there's doubtless a lot more to you than you think. And I can think of nothing that would give me greater joy than to help you discover just how great you are, really, and the huge potential, that the huge person that you can become, and for me to help you see your own potential and then actually live up to it, gives me greater joy and sense of fulfillment than anything else. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing this with you. So that's also why I'm happy to offer a 30-minute call, let's call it a discovery call, where you can share where you're at, and I can share how I might be able to help you, what working with me looks like. We do one-on-one work, group work, and I can take you on a coaching journey just to help you understand what it might feel like, this transformational work. And believe you me, it's probably not nearly as scary or threatening as you might think. And that's the feedback that I get over and over again, that actually, in a funny way, it even feels like fun. So there you go. If you'd like me to help you cross the 5th door threshold, just click that link and book a time. And I'd like nothing more than to help you enter your greatness.